This is another episode of Plat Chat Head-to-Heads. I am Sideshow. With me is Matthew Morello, as usual. And Matt has just been intrigued by this question on Twitter. I've never seen a man so curious in my life as to what the plebs think.
Yeah. You know, I'm interconnected to the plebs. Me and the
You
plebs.
are one of them, one might say.
I am. Yeah. You know, all of us don't get carried by our viewers, and pay.
Some of us are uncarryable trashes, like you. Uncarryable trash.
We all know what is the Scrum Squad is just a group of. I mean, they can't even see those people. I don't know how you've been able to carry some of them, but.
Yeah, that's quite right, Matt.
That's not the topic for today, though. That's
No.
not the topic for today.
The topic for today is who is the frontrunner for MVP so far. So we award awards at the end of the season, and Plat Chat is going to be doing our own awards, right? Because the Overwatch League, frequently mess stuff up. We try our hardest, Matt, but we can't influence them exactly.
Right. So this will be for who wins the league MVP, which is like kind of official, but we all know the Plat Chat Awards is really what the players are after.
Exactly. I have players coming up to me at the end of every season. They're like, man, I didn't win the league MVP, but the Plat Chat Awards is what I was going for. Thank you so much.
And usually they're coming over slightly intoxicated, yelling that.
Yeah, that's the after party at the end of the grand finals where you get those kind of opinions. So we are about halfway through the MVP race, and Matt Marcel, our incredible stats producer, tweeted that kind of has got people afire on Twitter. But we were thinking of doing this last week as well, because it is, it's halfway through the season. It's kind of time to start having these kind of discussions. MVP, it's normally picked from the top teams, but not necessarily. And also, I feel like with this award, you have to forecast a little bit into the future. Right. Because you have to think about who's going to be good throughout the entire year. It can't just be somebody that's been good so far, but you expect to drop off. Matt, who are you thinking about for MVP right now?
It's tough. I would almost, I kind of think of the league, I almost split it into two at this point between NA and APAC. So I would say that, like, usually it comes from the winning team or winning teams. So I think the four teams I kind of look at to potentially pick an MVP from would be Philly, Shanghai, New York, and the Shock. I think those are like the four teams I think you look at like near the top.
Sure.
You have also Dynasty in there, etc.
On certain weeks, Matt. On certain weeks.
Yeah, double shield, MVPs galore. Other week, maybe not. This year, though, with hero pools, it's been so hard to pick.
Yeah,
I feel like if I had to pick today, probably Carpe, and I say that because Philly's had a massive turnaround season. They look back to being in the potential of making it to a grand finals, maybe winning it. So I think now that we have a few years, I think there has to be some kind of like, it's obviously regular season MVP for that season, but there's some historical context that's taken into it. That kind of happens in traditional sports as well.
Sure. Yeah. A little bit.
Just the level of play that he brings in terms of the damage dealer. He's almost never subbed out every week because he can play so many heroes at a high level. He has such an impact every week because of that. And that's what I kind of value in terms of an MVP, specifically this year, where we see teams struggle week to weeks in terms of having the right damage dealers and consistent ones that they can play. I feel like Carpe adds a lot to Philly.
I would also say that if you're looking at the top teams right now, and also just to kind of quash this immediately, your MVP kind of has to come from one of the top teams, because otherwise, your MVP, unless they're an absolute standout carry player on like a top five.
The only argument you could have made for somebody who's not one of like the teams that I mentioned potentially before he got hurt and couldn't play would have been Xe.
That's an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, I know that a lot of people had him for rookie of the year.
He was popping off like crazy.
Yeah.
And that was a Paris team that nobody expected anything of. So to have them in like the middle of the playoff hunt, like right near the top, I think you could have given him some honors for this too.
Most of the time, the top teams are going to make it deeper in the playoffs as well, which is when you play against better opponents, which is where you prove yourself as an MVP candidate too. So to have somebody like Decay, I think, is another interesting example of a carry player on a I don't want to say a bottom level team, but on a team that's at like middle of the pack to slightly above, that is punching against the top teams just purely because of Decay. That's somebody that you could have as like an MVP candidate, but I don't believe that Dallas are going to go deep enough in playoffs to prove that Decay can hang against the absolute best in the world all the time in like these playoff games. Right. Now, having said that, Dallas did just play against Philadelphia Fusion, against Carpe, and I would say that Decay even outperformed Carpe in that match. But,
Decay's sick.
But Decay was also playing Tracer, which is where he has his highest level carry performances. And so I feel like a couple of these things weigh against Decay to the point where you would put Carpe in front.
I do feel like the awards are going to be weird this year too, because we saw so many of the DPS play like Zarya most of last year. It's like, well, what, Decay could win like most improved player, but like I don't know if he's improved. I think he's just able to play the heroes that he would have wanted.
Oh yeah, for sure. He's always been an absolute freak beast. I want to throw one question at you, Matt, though, because I think that a bunch of people brought this up on Twitter, and I think it's an absolutely great point that I hadn't really considered, is what do you think about Moth for MVP? Because the San Francisco Shock are undeniably an elite level team. They won last year. They're looking great this year as well, aside from a couple of instances. But those instances are where Moth couldn't play. Basically, like he wasn't really playing because they weren't running the Lucio in the meta. And so Shock as a team are absolutely dominant, but they only seem to be that dominant when Moth is in. Now, whether that's to do with his shot calling or whether it's to do with just the fact that they love playing in this high tempo style around the Lucio, that seems to indicate to me that he is an MVP kind of caliber player.
That's where I think you get into the conversation, though, of what your definition of MVP is. Like, is it the most important player to a team that if they lost them, that they would fall apart?
Because that's absolutely Moth, right? Like, he's a really important player for sure.
That probably is Moth. I think right now you could probably say that. But...
And he comes out with the big clutches as well. Like you saw his 3K boop. Like he is a playmaker.
I think it would be really hard. I think I could vote for Moth for MVP. I think he's that good of a Lucio player. I think like to contextualize it to fans would be very difficult in the sense that like when you watch Jonak, you can clearly tell like this guy's a monster, right? Yeah. Sinatra as well. Last year, you can see it all year long. It's kind of hard to show visually what Moth brings to the game and the team. I will say one of the big kind of arguments you can make for Moth is that he's able to play like literally everything. Like this weekend, they had him on the Zen. They've had him on Batiste, Mercy, Lucio. He can play so many of those heroes. I feel like if somebody was going to pick like somebody from the Shock, you would have people would probably kind of gravitate towards like Rascal or Chayobin in terms of like an MVP. I think Moth definitely deserves the votes and the consideration, though. I mean, the guy is a beast. Who would you say would be, because you've casted a handful of games in the Asian region. I've only done I want to say like 4 or 5.
If you had to pick somebody, a lot of them, because Brent enjoys just being up at fucking degenerate hours.
So do I, but Mitch doesn't enjoy it. Maybe we'll get a one where I cast with Brent at night. That would be. That would be.
Dude, I'd love that. That would be amazing.
That would be splendid. Who would you say would be the MVP from the Asian region?
I think that's a really hard question because obviously when you're talking about the North American region, Philadelphia is an obvious standout, incredible team.
You really pick from like 2 teams.
Yeah, and then there's the Shock as well, right? But for the Asian region, you've got to say Shanghai. Even though Seoul beat them recently, Seoul have just looked terrible in certain metas. So I feel that would be just straight up like a wrong take to say that somebody from the Seoul Dynasty has been an MVP caliber player. But for Shanghai Dragons, the problem is that they are such a well-rounded team with star players across the board.
They rotate so often.
And they do, that it's hard. Now, when I think about Rookie of the Year, Lip is 100% at the top of the table for me because this guy has been a phenom on DPS. But do I think that he's really been an MVP
level?
the issue for me is I don't really think so, because Carpe is so much more of a decisive factor for the Philadelphia Fusion than Lip is for Shanghai, because the rest of Shanghai all play at this outrageous level, and Lip always has Fletter alongside him, or Ding or Diem if they rotate them in. But normally it's Fletter alongside him, putting up great performances at the same time. And yeah, Fletter really has been nuts this season, more so than his previous 2 seasons as well. He really has shone now that the rest of the Shanghai Dragons are incredible players. And so Lip, for me, is dominating the Rookie of the Year award, but is not really there in terms of the MVP. And so I find it hard to nominate anybody from Shanghai, because I wouldn't say it's really... I saw a couple of people on Twitter saying Void, but I think Void has been good, but I don't think Void has been carrying Shanghai.
Usually the MVP kind of screams out to you, right?
Yeah, and I think that Carpe really does that, and I think that Moth does that as well.
For anybody in the... Yeah, I mean, you don't even really kind of consider New York, right? But I mean, we still have a lot of time in the season.
Yeah.
And maybe a Mono can sneak in there.
That really would be a sneaky play, though, because so far he's been good. He's been well-rounded. Yeah, Sabiobi hasn't even been played all of the time as well. They've been playing a lot of...
And then I think Shanghai is just too... It's too all over the place in terms of sometimes they play Fearless, they play Stay on One, Void is the only one that stays in, really, 100% of the time.
Yeah, and I mean, you can look at supports too. I saw a couple of people talking about, Alarm, because he's been so good for the Philadelphia Fusion team, specifically as a Rookie of the Year award, because obviously he's brand new coming in, but also as MVP, because I think one of the reasons that Philly has looked a lot better is because... they've been able to have a better backline. Now, I don't personally think so for the MVP. That's why I didn't even mention him when we were talking about that. But I've seen some people say his name, and I think that it's an okay shout, but I feel like it doesn't really fit.
Because until I hear otherwise, I don't know how you pick an MVP from the whole league when we're not going to see them play against each other. So I'm almost kind of operating in the standpoint that we would have to pick 2.
Sure, until there's some kind of playoffs at the end of the year and they all play against each other.
Until there's some playoffs, and I don't know. Where I could easily see Alarm being the Rookie of the Year of the NA region, and then you could have Lip be the MVP, or no, I mean the Rookie of the Year of APAC. Is there an MVP in the Asian region that would not come from the top team? Somebody from
Well... Weirdly, I mean, you might... So the second thing would be to look at the Seoul Dynasty and see who's doing well there. But, Fitz has been a great addition, or not really addition, but Fitz has really blossomed being alongside Profit on that team.
But he doesn't scream MVP, though.
No, he doesn't. And I don't think that the Seoul Dynasty... So... The way that Seoul Dynasty would field an MVP player is if they fixed the issues that they've been having in the weeks where they got rolled. So when they were playing the dive style with the Sombra Echo kind of stuff, and they just got dominated by Hangzhou, that's really where they've got to step up. The weeks where they were just getting 3-0 Ruffle stomped. That's where they got to step up.
We may not know the MVP in the APAC region yet. And I'm going to say this because... all of those Vancouver players are out there. If they go to a team and they turn that team around, or that team starts to ascend into the higher echelon of the APAC region, you would have to heavily consider them at that point, right?
Yeah.
Players have a lot of flair, obviously loved in the community. They kind of have they tick all the boxes of what would be an MVP type of candidate.
I agree. I think that as well, you look at, and this is going to be a bit of an outside shot, and I know you're going to say that it screams the Guangzhou charge.
Oh, don't.
Listen, Matt.
Shu, give me a Shu MVP.
No, not Shu, actually, but Shu actually is a fantastic player. But when I think about the Guangzhou charge and the person that carries them over the edge, I've got to point towards Nero. I've got to say,
I thought you were going to say Neptuno. I was going to spit my coffee all over my screen. I was like,
Neptuno's been away.
I know.
But when, so the Guangzhou Charge at the moment are ahead in the May tournament qualifiers. They're what, 3-0 or something like that. And Guangzhou have been doing really well recently. And I do think that they're a very well-rounded team, and I don't think that this is a leading MVP candidate in any sense. I think you'd have to look at the Shanghai Dragons. But an outsized shot to be able to carry the Guangzhou Charge deep in some kind of tournament structure or playoffs would be Nero. The guy has been fantastic at every hero he's played recently.
How much weight are you going to throw into the May tournament in terms of MVP? Like let's say if like the Valiant ended up winning the May tournament,
hey,
like do they?
If the Valiant win the May tournament and it's not some kind of really outside meta, then I think that does show quite a bit of talent, because they've not just had to win a bunch of games, they've had to beat better and better opponents as the elimination bracket continues.
Right,
that's the way that an elimination bracket
happens.
happens.
For an MVP for them for the whole season based off of let's say they finish anywhere from 5 to 8 and they win the May tournament.
Oh, like, no, definitely not.
But that's sway you that much. Gotcha.
But if there's a June tournament and a July tournament, and they do well in those, then yeah, absolutely, I would weight those brackets more. Now, if the May tournament is something that only happens in May and something different develops with the COVID situation, then who?
What about Yaki?
I had people on Twitter talking about Yaki as well.
The Florida Mayhem are 6-4. They're moving up in the Atlantic.
They are definitely moving up. Now, for me, Florida haven't really taken on incredible opponents yet. They haven't proven themselves at the top level. They've beaten the Paris Eternal. That's true. Mm-hmm. But until they beat another top team, they have got 3 wins over the Boston Uprising.
Well, I mean, let's be real.
No, sorry, 2 wins over the Boston Uprising. And then a win over Houston, Toronto, and Vancouver, the brand new roster.
You're going to be waiting a while for a win against a top team. How many top teams are there in NA?
Well, they could play against like Gladiators, for example. They could play against a Shock or a Philly. Like those are teams that I would definitely respect, and I think that it would be fun to see Florida play against. Now, if they continue to perform, then hell yeah, Yaki's been an absolute beast. I mean, he's torn teams apart.
If they could get into the top 3 or top 2 by the end of the season in the Atlantic,
then hell yeah,
I think he's got a strong case. I think.
For sure. And then also you're thinking about Rookie of the Year too, because he's one of the brand new players this season, right?
Give them both.
Yeah, give them both.
Yeah, I have to fill out less sheets to vote. I'm okay with that.
So yeah, those are the kind of players that I'm thinking. It's an interesting situation
right now.
I also tweeted that. I also think Carpe right now. So this is one of the few head-to-heads where we're, I think, going to be aligned on the end system.
What would you pick for the Asian region if you had to pick today?
If I had to pick right now for MVP...
Yeah.
Weirdly, I think it would be Lip. I think that he has impressed me so much with how he's... I feel like maybe I have a bit of a bias because I had I had some expectations, but I didn't have really high expectations, and he has outperformed any that I did have, that I would have to say Lip. But I think that it's so much harder to call in the Asian region.
It is.
Because... there aren't standout carry players on the Shanghai Dragons.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're looking at like Lip, Fitz, and then somebody from New York, and maybe maybe like the experimental buffs to Zenyatta go through, and Jonak comes back and just starts dunking on people.
I also think like Fleta might be a possibility as well.
Fleta. Like if somebody signs like a Haxel or a Slime and then they start to pop off, that would be kind of cool as well. So I still think NA is a little bit easier to see. I think you're looking at Carpe, somebody from the Shock, and then somebody on the outside, whether it be like a Gladiators who get into like the top echelon,
and like a Space, for example.
A Space, exactly. But I think NA is way easier to look at right now. Is kind of Carpe's thing to lose.
Yeah. Okay, let us know who you think in the comments as well. There's been an explosion of this conversation on Twitter, but we're always happy to take some thoughts.
But this is where the real conversations happen. Yeah, you can go look at all those fake convos on Twitter, but this is where you get all your real info.
Everyone knows that the 5 heads hang out in the Plat YouTube channel.
Yeah. Or they just yell at us for having our audio wrong and stuff.
Yeah, go enjoy that meeting of Mensa level IQs. And we'll see you in the next head-to-head.